Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And Ginny, all your clients are gone. You need to go get new ones right now.
Oh boy. Okay.
Right after this. So.
All my clients are gone.
All your clients are gone. Well, maybe not all your clients. Maybe
I've
just
lost
your
some,
biggest
lost
client.
some clients.
Yes,
lost a client.
This is a challenge a lot of agencies go through at one point or another, particularly when they're small, because most small agencies have a handful of really large clients, or maybe one really large client that makes up a disproportionate share of the revenue. And when that client cuts back or leaves, many of these agency owners who have been sitting pretty before now panic because they didn't have a pipeline in place because business was good. And so they come to you, they come to me, and they say, what do we do now? And so that's what we'll talk about today. What do you do if you suddenly find yourself in desperate need of revenue and you don't have an existing pipeline that you're already working?
I think you should work on your website and your capabilities deck, because those two things will bring in clients.
Absolutely. Immediately fire up that editor, start messing around in WordPress, and
please don't do that.
The clients will show up the next day. Unfortunately,
the other one that I think we should discuss, are you getting all these emails from people saying that they can give you like 10 clients in 30 days and quadruple your revenue? Like, I get 10 of those emails every day. It's insane.
Yes.
Please don't do that either.
There must be so many rich people out there because these folks just have the sure thing. And I'm sure if you're an agency owner, you are seeing these. They're coming to you on LinkedIn. They're coming to you by email. And people are saying, you know, we can get you as an agency 10 leads guaranteed in the next 7 days or your money back or whatever. I mean, fantastic. It doesn't work. There are no shortcuts. There are certainly things that you can do to accelerate your development of revenue when you are in this position, but there's no sure thing. There's no guarantees. There's no magic wand that you can simply tap into and all of a sudden the revenue shows up. It is going to take work. It is going to take some effort. It is going to require things that you probably aren't entirely comfortable with in order to shake the money tree and get revenue in sooner rather than later. Which is why you should always be building a pipeline. But we know
you should always
that realistically doesn't always happen. So that's what we're focusing on today.
Human nature is, right, that we are like, oh, okay, well, we're busy, we're doing client work, all of this is going well, and our human nature just is to deprioritize or not focus on biz dev. And then when something happens, we lose a client or whatever, or two clients, or the economy bottoms out or whatever it happens to be, we have to put the priority back on business development, when in fact, business development should be your number one priority, and client service should be delegated to your team so that you can focus on the right kinds of things to continue to build your business, even in times that are good.
Right. And that's, I mean, it's the top piece of advice that I've given to owners of all businesses really for the past 20 plus years. And it was a lesson I learned the hard way early on in my own agency business, was when you are the busiest is when you need to focus the most on business development. And it seems counterintuitive that that's the case, right? You know, things are going well. That's the time when you need to focus, because otherwise you will have your pipeline dry up, you will have your relationships atrophy, and you will not be in a position to be generating business on an ongoing basis so that you smooth over those bumps in the road, because we all lose clients at one point or other. There's no agency that I've ever heard of that has kept every client permanently. It just doesn't happen. I mean, for all sorts of reasons. They have a staffing change. They have a change in their business. They don't fit with you anymore. I mean, there's so many reasons why clients go away. So you have to anticipate that it's going to happen no matter how well you're doing for them, no matter how happy they seem. And so you need to be focused on business development on an ongoing basis. But let's assume you did not do that. Let's assume you didn't listen to all the advice that we give all the time and that most professional advisors will give you, and you are in that position. And so, Ginny, you get that call that says your whale client is going away, and they're probably not even going to try to fulfill the 90-day notice period or whatever that you have in your contract. And so they're going to say, well, we're done at the end of this month. So basically you feel like you've got 3 weeks to solve this money problem. Now, the reality is you probably can't solve it that quickly. So hopefully you
Right.
do have some kind of cushion there. But what would, I mean, after you sort of, hang up the phone and you start pounding the table and yelling and screaming and all that kind of stuff, and you kind of get past that and you acknowledge this is happening, I need to do something about it. What do you do to try to fill up your revenue or fix your revenue situation?
I mean, there are lots of things that you can do for sure, to build your pipeline, and it ranges from, going onto LinkedIn and figuring out who your contacts are and who your network is and reaching out. I've had a couple of situations in the past, probably the past several months, 6 or 7 months, where people have lost their jobs, and it's not exactly the same because it's a job versus a client, but they've reached out and said, "Hey, recently lost my job. This is what I'm looking for. Would you mind keeping your eyes and ears open?" And yeah, I'm super happy to do that. The same kind of thing can happen with you, where you can use your network and say, "We just lost this client. We're looking for this." There's a freelancer that I follow on LinkedIn, and she's creating really great content. And at the end, she says in every call to action, "If you're looking for help to do something like this, give me a call." So there are lots of things you can do, from using your network to creating content. That some of those things take longer than 3 weeks or 90 days. These are the kinds of things that you should be doing consistently, but you can, especially from a networking perspective, start to get on the horse pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think it really does start with networking, and when you're out of work, that's, I think, a little bit easier because almost everybody wants to help someone who has lost their job, right? That's the natural
Yeah, sure.
instinct, and so you can very easily go out there and say, "Hey, lost my job, got laid off, whatever," and you will immediately be able to find people who are willing to help. When it comes to losing clients and your agency's in that position, you're in a little bit more of a challenging situation. I don't think that's something that I would recommend that you post publicly, like you might with
Right,
being out
right,
of
right,
work,
right.
right?
Yes, don't put
Because
that on
there is
LinkedIn.
a certain stigma from a business perspective
Yep.
that can attach to being in desperate need. And so I would typically, but I think it is something that you can use with your close contacts, with people that you know and have a good relationship with, and preferably people who can refer business to you but are not necessarily target clients, right? I think
Right,
the challenge
right.
with making a target client aware that you're desperate is, first of all, it can be kind of a turnoff because
Yes.
people want to work with someone who's in demand, but more importantly, they then know that they have all the leverage in the
Right.
negotiation for the terms of the deal. And
Yes.
so you do have to be a little bit more cautious about how much of the truth you tell to whom, when you're in that process. But I think networking it is the only thing I can think of that allows you to immediately get out
Yep.
there and
Yep.
start filling the pipeline. And
Yep.
most of us have a lot of people
Yep.
that we know or are connected with that we haven't talked to in a while, or that we've never really talked to. And that if we just sit there and we focus on doing outreach on LinkedIn, by email, setting up conversations, it's not fun. It's not what we want to do, but it's not true cold calling, right? So I'm not
Right.
advocating that you just
Right.
go buy
Right.
some list
Right.
from one of these and you just start, dialing for dollars. I don't think that is going to win you business in the near term. But your network that you've probably neglected, and that's why you don't have a pipeline, that's where I would start. Talk to as many people as you can.
And I think in this case, it can be former clients, depending on the
Yeah,
relationship and, when,
absolutely.
how they left. But we have several former clients who I could call and say, "Hey, listen, we're looking to beef up this part of our business, or we're looking for this particular client, or I see you're connected to so and so. Would you mind making an introduction?" And I think that works as well, without me
Absolutely.
saying we just lost a whale client or something like that. So I think that I agree with you. I think networking is, and totally agree. Don't post it on LinkedIn. Like, do one-off emails and phone calls. But I think that's probably the fastest way to start to generate and build your pipeline immediately.
Yeah, and I think with most people, you don't necessarily have to, or you don't say that you've lost business and you're trying to recover it. You would just say, "We're looking to grow,"
Yep.
which is true.
What
You're
is
just
true. Yep.
looking to grow from a lower point than you were at 30 days
Yep.
ago.
Yep.
But you are
Absolutely.
still looking to grow.
Yeah.
And so I think if you talk in those terms, you're effectively telling the truth, but you're omitting the reason why you need to grow. And I think that's perfectly fine because, people are still understanding what your objective is and why you're reaching out. Because if you just reach out and talk to someone and it's not clear that you're looking for new clients or something like that, and I think you're just calling to kibitz,
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
that's a problem, right?
That's a problem. Yes.
They need to understand. But I think the other thing that this calls out is the importance of being able to tell your agency's story really succinctly. Because if you're doing this outreach and you have and you're just kind of just randomly ambling through the conversation, that's not helpful. You need to be really clear about the identity and positioning that you have as an agency. So while I do not generally encourage you, if you are in this revenue loss situation, to spend a lot of time focusing on creating collateral and that kind of stuff, if you are not clear about your identity and positioning, and you cannot, in no more than 2 to 3 sentences, absolute tops, really clearly identify what you do and who you do it for, do that first. That is a worthwhile exercise before you start talking to a lot of people. Because if you're on the phone with them and they just know you're a PR agency or a marketing agency, but they don't really understand who you serve and what you do, well, then you're wasting your time in those conversations.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I used to have a business coach who, in the beginning of our relationship, would say, "Who can you refer to me?" And I'd be like,
Yep.
I don't know. Let me think about it, because when put on the spot like your mind goes blank. So he started showing up for our one-to-ones with a list, because he'd gone through LinkedIn to see who I'm connected to and who he thought might be a good prospect for him. And he'd say, "Can you introduce me to any of these 10 people?" And I would go through the list and say, yes, yes, no, 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 yes, and yes. And then I would make those introductions, to those 3 or 4 people. That makes it significantly easier on the person you're asking for help, because you're not putting the onus on them. You're not requiring them to do all of the work. You're saying, "Hey, I noticed that you're connected to so-and-so at this company. They'd be a great client for us. Would you mind making an introduction?" Sure. Most people will do that. Absolutely. And that again is another easy way to start to build your pipeline through the people that you know very quickly.
Right. And so the having a specific list is one good way. The other is to have a very clear criteria. So instead of saying, "Who can you refer me to?" you could say, "Hey, I'm looking for automotive supply companies that are between $5 and $50 million
Very
with,
specific.
in the Midwest," or what. I mean, something that allows me to, instead of sitting there saying, I don't know, like you did when you were asked for just "who can you refer to me," now my mental Rolodex is much easier to navigate, and I can go through who do I know who's in the automotive supply sector. In my case, I don't think anybody, but
Right.
I do know an agency that works with some automotive like tire manufacturers, so I could refer you to them, right? I mean, it's one hop away, but I would not have thought of that had we not
Right.
had that kind of criteria. And so
That's
you
right.
need to have that kind of criteria so that you can tell people, what does your ideal client look like? Because then they can find somebody. And you can even ask them for advice. You can say, these are the kinds of companies I'm looking for. Who do you know you might not know those people, but who do you know who you might be able to refer me to who could make those introductions? Or, I mean, anytime you ask for advice, people feel good.
Yeah, they do.
And
That's true.
and
Yep.
so,
Yep.
I love, if you're in this position where you need to accelerate your networking, whether it's because you have this urgent need or just because you're looking to grow over time and build a reasonable pipeline because you are listening to us, ask them for advice. And this is true even if you think they might be a prospect themselves. Ask for advice. Say, okay, that we're looking at rolling out this service offering or tweaking this thing. What do you think? Is that the kind of thing that businesses are looking for? How would you describe it to people? What are those pain points?
Love that.
If you frame it more that way, you can often get people talking more and have a more receptive conversation than you going to them and either saying, "Hey, are you interested in hiring us?" Right? Just kind of
Right.
punch them right
Right.
in the face and saying, "Money, I want it now." Or even, "Hey, who can you refer me to?" Right? Because now if you're asking for that advice, you're putting them up on a pedestal and positioning them as an expert that you want to learn from. And I think that can be particularly powerful in moving the conversation forward.
I love that advice. Please, everybody, listen to that advice. That's really good advice. The second thing I would say is that there's that short-term piece, but longer term, there are things you should be doing very consistently to keep your pipeline full so that you're not in this crisis moment all the time. Like we lost a client in August. I actually said to them, I think the time has come for you to sail on your own. And they said no. And I was like, I really think you can do this by yourself. And they said, are you firing me? And I was like, we're not firing you. We just like the project's over. It was crisis work. We're done. Like, you're not crisis.
But the fact that you
anymore.
handed them that man overboard kit and a life preserver was kind of a giveaway.
So it took them a couple of months to realize that we were correct and they really didn't need us anymore, and that they can always call if something happens, right? But I had stuff backfilled with that, and then I could go to our 3 prospects who were kind of waiting in the wings and say, okay, we're ready for you to do this, this, and this. And that's all through content. It's all, every bit of that is through content. It's through, we've tweaked it over the years. It used to be that the blog was our number 1 driver of revenue, then became the podcast. Now it's LinkedIn. So you tweak it where you're distributing every year probably, but the content is the content. And it's the way that you do it for your clients, you should be doing that for yourself. And I understand it's not billable work and it always gets deprioritized and we always put our client work first. But I am telling you, it is the very best way to drive revenue consistently.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I think for most agency owners, content may not be easy, but it is one of the easier things that they can do from a business development perspective.
Yes.
Because I know, well, actually I do know. I know a very, very small percentage of agency owners who actually enjoy the cold calling process, right? Very, very small. There are a few, they really enjoy it. They're extroverts who like to just sit there and have new conversations with new people, and they don't mind getting yelled at, hung up on, ignored, all that kind of stuff. If you are one of those few people, great. Then obviously you already know what to do if you are in a revenue ditch, because you'll just sit there and start doing it because it's your nature to do it. But for the rest of you, it can be a really good way to supplement some of the outreach that you're doing. It can be a good tool to help that outreach along, because if you're posting on LinkedIn or your blog or you have a podcast, those are things you can share with people. And it becomes much easier to have that as part of your conversation. If you're talking to somebody and they express, oh, we have this particular challenge, you can always say, oh, I wrote an article about that not long ago. Let me forward that to you. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it helps to advance the conversation without you having to move into a sales pitch, because you're just sharing your expertise. You're sharing something for free. And so it really facilitates that outreach, so that you don't feel that icky feeling, that many agency owners get when they're out there and they really feel like they're just selling in that conversation. You're just trying to be helpful, and that does come back to benefit you. But you can also use the content itself for those connections. You can interview people for your article or your podcast.
That's great.
Again, you're positioning them as an expert. Most people will say yes to an interview, either, whether it's something that you're going to put into an article or in a podcast episode. And that can be a good way to accelerate your conversations, because it doesn't all have to be just, hey, can we schedule a 30-minute call to catch up? Right. So some of this outreach may be that, but more often than not, you want to have a better excuse than that.
Yeah. And I think to that point, I think a lot of people are worn out by, do you have 15 minutes to chat? Like, nobody has 15 minutes to chat, but they do have time to answer an email or respond to something that you've sent to them, or, read an article or listen to a podcast episode that you've thoughtfully sent to them. Almost everyone will do that. But trying to carve out 15 or 30 minutes during the day when we're all hectic and we're all busy is almost impossible. So make it as easy for them as possible. And also, there are people who despise the "can we chat?" Somebody on my team.
Well, I mean,
just make it easy.
I don't love a just generic "can we chat?" but I think that you can get people on the phone if you give them a reason why. That's not that you're selling them, right? Can we chat about how I can help you? No.
Yeah.
No, because you haven't given me, you haven't laid the groundwork for that yet.
Right.
If I say, can I have 15 minutes because I'm researching for an article or an ebook that I'm writing or something like that?
Yes.
You've got a better shot. Yes, you still have the scheduling challenges that exist, but people are more likely to be receptive to that. And they might say, I can't fit it in my schedule. Then you can always fall back to, well, what if I just sent you a couple of questions by email? that we might be able to do,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
I would still encourage you, if you can have a voice conversation versus doing it by email, you're better off, right? It's a more powerful way to connect with somebody, preferably by video, right? Because it's still even more powerful.
Yep.
I would stay away from in person to the extent that you can, simply because if you are in that desperate need for revenue now, that really slows you down, right?
Yes.
So unless there's someone who, they always come through for you over the years, they've referred a ton of business to you, and you know that all they really need to know is that you shouldn't need to meet them in person, but maybe there are some people in your network that are just that way. That might be worthwhile. But one of the mistakes I see is that people try to set up lots of lunches and coffees or travel or those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And if you need money fast, you want to
not
do
the way
things
to
that
do
you
it.
can you can scale much more easily and quickly than that. And so that tends to be phone, email, Zoom, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So make it as easy for people as possible. Help them understand what you're trying to achieve. Help them understand why you're different and how they can refer business to you, and create content that demonstrates that thought leadership and your expertise. And your pipeline will always be full. But you have to do the work. You can't just expect it to come, or that referrals are just going to come out of nowhere. That's not going to happen. And especially if you're in a crisis mode, right? Because you've just lost a client. You have to do the work, and you have to be consistent about it, because if you're not, you're going to be stuck every time you lose a client.
Yeah. And I mean, and you've got to start with a list, right? Because I mean, one of the other problems I see is people say, well, I don't even know who to talk to, right? There's one of two things. Take LinkedIn and just look at all your connections and just go from A to Z and go through there and just, kind of start marking people off that are worth having a conversation. There are going to be people on there you don't even recognize their names. I know that's I'm like, I have no idea how I know that person. Sometimes I click on them and look at where they worked in the past, and I'm like, still have
don't
no
know.
idea. Then I look, then I click the info to see what date we connected, and I compare it to where they were. Yep, still don't know. It happens, right? But more often than not, you're going to find plenty of names as you go through that. The other thing you can do is just take your inbox. If you're someone who doesn't delete all your mail, you have a record of it. Go back 2 or 3 years. And just, start from that period in time 3 years ago, and just start skimming through all your deleted emails until you see some names. You're like, oh, I haven't talked to so-and-so in 2 years.
That's a really good idea.
I should reach out. Right there, because particularly in that case, it's people that you interacted with. And if you use the search function on your email, you can even see what your last conversation was and say, hey, today I was looking at this article. It reminded me of what we talked about 18 months ago, because you just saw it in your inbox. Mm-hmm. They don't need to know that you were trying to find something. I mean, it might even be that you see their name, you see what you talked about last, and you can't think of anything that you've seen recently. So you go to Google and you type it in, and you find an article that you just stumbled across, and that you can use it as the hook for a conversation. This doesn't need to be difficult. It doesn't need to, and I'm not suggesting being dishonest with people, but you can manufacture the reasons. That's perfectly acceptable, but you need to start, just working through it methodically and making sure you're doing this outreach every single day, particularly if you're desperate. Don't sit there, freeze up. Don't do the behind the scenes work other than identity and positioning, because that's where too many of you are messing up. And when you have that revenue need, it's all about talking to as many people as possible.
And the last thing I will add is that both of our communities are pretty good about that kind of stuff. Different from posting it publicly on LinkedIn or something like that. Correct. You can say in the SpinSucks community, you can say, hey, I'm looking for this, or we're looking to grow and add this, or this is the type of client we're looking for. Can you help? And almost always there's somebody who can help. So don't be afraid to use either one of our communities for that purpose as well.
Absolutely. Your peers are great resources on this, because, too often agencies view every other agency as a competitor. Not true. Most agencies don't really compete directly with each other. And most agencies are, happy to help when they can, because it makes them look good in their own network if they can make a referral that works out.
And good karma. It's good karma.
Good karma. Yeah. So, all right. Well, we'll end this episode of Good Karma. No, I'm sorry. The Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it depends.